In this lesson, we'll talk about a very important area of RealFlow called the Export Central. Alright, so the Export Central within RealFlow is really an area that doesn't get just a whole lot of attention, but it's actually a very, very important area as far as controlling just what sort of data is output from our RealFlow simulations. So to get to this Export Central, we need to go up to Export, and then down to Export Central, or we can use the keyboard shortcut, which is F12. So if I click on this, we essentially have a listing of all the possible items that we could have in our scene. So any particle emitters, any grid emitters, any domains, any real waves, and so on and so forth. Now, in our case, we don't have any particle emitters, so nothing shows up in here. But what we do have in this particular scene is a grid domain. So underneath here, we have listed any grid domains. In our case, we just have the one. So if I were to expand this, you can see in this area we can actually choose just what type of a file is written out whenever we go through our simulation. So in something like our grid fluid, you can see that this is actually set to write out what's called a grid cache or a GDC file. Now, if I wanted to import something like this particle sequence into my 3D application, for most situations, unless I'm using something like the render kit, this GDC file is not something that can be imported. But if I wanted to import this as a file sequence, or rather a particle sequence, we could enable this bin extension, and now whenever we go through our simulation, RealFlow will actually write this data in a .bin file, which this type of information can be imported directly into our 3D app just using the RealFlow plugin. So we also have options like being able to write out a Krakatoa file format, and within this we can actually expand that and choose what type of information is written into that Krakatoa file. So this Export Central, again, is really where we can start to go in and essentially just dictate what type of information is going to be written out. For this particular grid mesh that we have, which is this simple grid mesh 01, if I were to expand this, you can see, again, by default, it's set to export just a mesh sequence, a .bin file. But if we wanted to maybe export this as an OBJ sequence instead, we could just simply enable that option. And now the next time we go through our simulation, it will write out this mesh sequence. Now, in addition, if we were using a real wave or even a grid domain that required some kind of a displacement map for high frequency waves, things like that, we looked at those types of options in our real wave lesson. We could choose to export a displacement texture, and you can see it's going to be writing this out in a TIFF file. And also we can actually see exactly the path that these options will be written out to, or rather these files will be written out to. Now, in a situation like this where we're actually going to be writing out some kind of an image sequence, we may actually need to write these out in a special way if we want to actually take these back into our 3D app. So for example, if I were to select this option, let's go to our file name options. You can see right now it's set to actually write something like these files out as a name underscore frame number and then dot extension. Now, if we were going to be taking something like this displacement map into something like Maya, for example, Maya really prefers to have this as something like name.extension.number or name.number.extension, one of these two. If we're going to be trying to use some kind of a displacement map sequence, this name underscore number extension is probably not going to work for us. And then again, once we have everything set, the next time we go through our simulation, RealFlow will go ahead and write out this new data in whatever format we've specified. So again, this Export Central is something that doesn't always get a tremendous amount of attention within RealFlow, but it is something that is very, very important, especially if you'd like to output your data in some kind of a special way that is maybe not the default method for RealFlow. So that's a quick look at the Export Central.